Data and analytics has been a field, and it continues to be a field, and it will grow dramatically. But I think we all need to be data and analytics literate. I spend a fair amount of time working with universities in the United States, and I'm looking to work with universities around the world. And I've spent the last 12 years working with our local high school so we can start to teach students when they're teenagers about the value of data and analytics. So I think we as a profession should work really hard to help everybody be analytically literate.
Welcome to the MindSpeaking podcast, where we talk about the human side of data. In other words, data, communication, and personal development. My name is Gilbert Eikelenboom. I'm driven by curiosity, and my aim is to spread insights that you can apply in your life starting today. So, let's do it. Let's start MindSpeaking. Today I'm speaking with John Thompson. You may know him from LinkedIn. He's the best-selling author of 2 books. The first one, Analytics, How to Win with Intelligence. The second one, Building Analytics Teams. And I'm recommending it to everyone. I love the book. It's on my desk right now. The next book on the way is Data for All. So it's the third book that he will publish. We talk about the writing process and how this book is different compared to the other ones. John has worked for many companies like Dell, Gartner, and now he's the global head of artificial intelligence at EY. We speak about data-driven culture, so how to measure if your organization is data-driven. What is a good metric to look at? Then second, we look at what are the skills he considers and he evaluates when he's interviewing new data scientists and analysts. And lastly, we also speak about presenting data to a mixed audience, because that's a common challenge for all of us. There are way more topics we also dive into, but these were the most important ones. So I hope you're going to enjoy this episode as much as I did. Today's guest, John Thompson. All right, John, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gilbert. Always so good to talk to you. I'm so pleased to have the invitation, and thank you. I expect it to be an enjoyable conversation. I'm really looking forward to it.
100%. Me too. And there are many things I would love to dive into. But the first thing I want to ask about is about your third book, because you're working on your third book. And man, 3 books. I know what it's like to publish one and how much time it takes and effort and sweat and tears to produce one, let alone 3. So I guess you have quite some stamina. I was wondering how did you do it? Do you have any writing habits, or how do you create books like that?
Yeah, it's just something that I fell into. My wife was saying, John, you should write a book. You have so much to say. You should write a book. And I thought, no, I don't want to write a book. I'll never do that. I'm too busy. And then the opportunity came to write a book, and I did, and it was reasonably successful. And then I wrote the second book, Building Analytics Teams, which of course we've talked about and will talk about today. And then the third book, I finally figured out what I was doing. And now in the fourth book, I'm well in a groove. So we'll talk about the third book and maybe even a little about the fourth. But my process is a little unusual in that before I go to bed at night, I think about what I'm going to write the next day. And then when I get out of bed, it's pretty much written in my subconscious. I just have to sit down and tap it out on the keyboard. So I think about what I'm going to do the night before I go to bed. I wake up and then I write it.
Wow. And then you wake up and you sit down directly? You write down on your laptop or your computer?
Yep. Yeah. I usually, today I got it. It's 7 in the morning here, 7:11. I was at my desk at 4:45. I wrote for 2 hours and then started my day.
Oh, fantastic. And do you get up really early, or how do you manage your time?
Yeah, I do get up really early. I grew up in the U.S. state of Michigan. My father was an auto repair, had his own auto mechanic shop, and his idea was that children should work. So I was up every day, and I worked a couple hours before I went to school, and I've never broken that habit. So I get up early, I do things that I want to do for me personally, and then I do my normal day job after that.
Right. Yeah, Obama said this as well, that the most important work will be done before everyone is waking up.
It's
And
true. It's true.
yeah, and I guess it helps to prioritize the most important work.
Yeah.
And because you've written 3 books about data, you have a lot of experience in analytics. What was the first moment you started to become interested in data or analytics?
That I've been doing this for 37 years. So I left college. I obtained a computer science degree, and I started working in a large corporation in the United States. So it was focused on transportation, and I was building systems using assembler and COBOL and RPG and all the languages of the day. And it really struck me about 6 months into my career that everything that we do focused on data. All the systems were based on data, all the reports were based on data, everything we did was based on data. So I started talking to people about, well, shouldn't we do more with the data? Shouldn't we handle data more responsibly and more consciously and more proactively? And people just looked at me and said, what are you talking about? It's just data. There's really nothing there. And I thought that can't be, because everything is based on data. So I don't know. I just stuck with that position, and now nearly 4 decades later, it's come to be true.
Definitely true. And in your second book, Building Analytics Teams, you also talk a lot about how to build those teams and how to grow them. Where did you learn those first lessons, how to build analytics teams?
Well, I remember very clearly. I was working in a company in England. I was living in Chicago, and I was the CEO of the U.S. operations. And I ended up with a couple people on my team that had fallen out of favor with other managers in the organization. And, more than likely they were on the spectrum. They had never been diagnosed, but, I think they were on the autism spectrum. And I really started to see their creativity and their value and the things that they needed to be successful. And they just weren't, quote unquote, in the norm, of what other people thought they should be doing. They didn't do well in an office environment. They liked to work at night. They worked in this really bursty way where they created just huge amounts of value, and then they would be rather dormant. It was one way to say it, for longer periods than most people would like. And I just looked at that and I thought, these people are very much like musicians and artists. They're very creative, and they can create all sorts of wonderful, wonderful value. You just have to treat them differently. So that was the first inkling that, there was a different way to build and manage analytics teams.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned you need to treat them differently. And first of all, I like to point out that I appreciate that you recognize the value in people, right? Even though other people might say, hey, it's impossible to work with them or they don't perform. Apparently you saw the value, you appreciated what they could do and what was the opportunity. And you mentioned you just have to treat them a bit differently. What have some things that you have learned how to treat people?
Yeah, it's a great question, Gilbert, and thanks for asking it. It really comes down to treating everybody as an individual, not having expectations or, having just ideas that everybody should conform to a certain way. It's just not the way the world works anymore. It's not the way people probably have ever worked. So I try to look at the individual. I try to get to know them, their life, their families, their mindset, their circadian rhythms, and just look and see, because most people want to do good work. Most people have almost unlimited ability to create new and interesting things. You have to be tolerant of how they do it. That's the real issue, is that if you get hung up on how people do things, you're going to be disappointed a lot. Like I said, this one fellow that I had, the reason they gave him to me in the end, they said was, you're an American, so you have a thicker skin. You'll be able to fire him faster than any of the rest of us. That's the way you people are, which wow. I thought was kind of rude anyway. That was a bit of an assumption that all Americans are ruthless, heartless people. And I just started looking at this guy, and I'm like, he doesn't need to be fired. He just needs to be put in an environment where he can succeed.
Right. It sounds like you had a good eye for that. And
I do. I grew up in a very small farming community in Michigan, a town of 200 people, and everybody knew everybody. And I was fortunate enough to grow up with quite a small place. There was quite a bit of diversity, in the town, diversity of thought, diversity of approach, all that different kind of stuff. I mean, racially, we were all the same. But there were a lot of things in people that I learned about. And my father, as I said, had an auto repair shop. So I spent a lot of time talking to adults when I was a child. And I was very curious. I'm still very curious. So I would be asking people all sorts of questions. And sometimes they were embarrassing to my parents. You know, why do you say things like that? And why do you walk like that? And why do you wear those clothes? And why do you think that way? And, you know, my parents would just look at me and go, oh my God, this kid is out of control. But I just wanted to understand why people did what they did.
Yeah, there's a nice little story there. And when you spoke about those individuals and the people you did recognize had qualities, it's a nice transition to what do you see as desired skills or attributes that or traits that people should have when they are working in an analytics team. So for data leaders, what should they develop or what should they be on the lookout for?
Well, we've talked about it already. It's another really great question. Thanks, Gilbert. You know, curiosity. That's the first thing I look for in people is curiosity. And then I look for honesty and ethics. And then I look for kindness and consideration of others. So, you know, I really don't evaluate too many people on their tech skills. Most people, when they get to me, if I'm evaluating them for a job, you know, they've proven that they've gone to a good university, or maybe they've gone to a second tier university. They've proven that they're, you know, that they can do, you know, they can code, or they can decompose problems, or they can speak, or they can write, or they can do all of those things. Or they're very good with neural networks, or very good with generative AI. You know, I really don't end up with too many people that I have to evaluate them from a technical perspective.
Yeah, so John, you talked about the importance of other types of skills, right? By the time people get to you with an interview, for an interview, then they have proven that they have the right technical skills, they went to the right schools, and you name a lot of soft skills, or I'm not sure how you want to call them. How do you test that in an interview? How do you assess if they have kindness, if they have an open mind, if they have all these things you mentioned?
You know, I think most people, many people, if not most people, are surprised when they interview with me, because I don't sit down and give you coding challenges. I don't ask about, you know, hey, do you understand, you know, do loops and for loops, and do you know what pandas do, and are you good in data visualization? I don't ask any of those questions. I ask questions about life. You know, how do you handle this, and what's your relationship with your partner, and you know, what do you do on your spare time, and what was the last thing you learned, and what books do you read, and you know, where do you go for fun, and do you like to travel, and you know, I'm just trying to figure out if they're well-rounded people who I would like to spend time with. That's really what I'm looking for is, you know, do I want to sit in a room with you day in and day out and work together through challenges and problems? I assume you're smart. I assume that you know, you've done different things in your career, because, you know, most people who get to me have 10, 15, 20 years of experience. So I'm really looking for, you know, are you a person that I want to spend time with?
Mm-hmm. Yes, because especially in consulting, right? There are weeks that you spend a lot of time with each other. So it's especially important. Can imagine also in your role at EY right now, as global head of AI, you also spend a lot of time with people, with working with teams. So definitely. You'll in the book, Building Analytics Teams, you also talk about open versus fixed mindset. What do you mean with that? Can you elaborate?
Sure. You know, a fixed mindset is you look at things in a certain way. You know, you always solve things in, you know, linear fashion. You start from 1 and you go to 5, or, you know, you may be different. You start at 5 and you go to 1, or something like that. But in analytics, it's always changing. I mean, especially now with generative AI, everything is just kind of topsy-turvy over the last couple of months. But I always look for people that, you know, would look at it and say, you know, we've always used our internal data sets to look at how our products perform. But why don't we turn that on its head and bring in our consumer behavior, our competitive information, market information, different factors that are outside the organization that will help us understand this problem from a different perspective. So I'm always looking for people that, hey, I've solved forecasting problems probably for the last 15 years. But every time I look at one, I try to think, what else can I do here? What is going to be germane to the problem? What other kind of data can I find? Or what, I mean, today, with synthetic data generation, what data can I generate? You don't have to just use what's there and what other people have purchased and have consumed. So I'm looking for creative thinkers. I'm looking for people that may have solved a problem 10 times, but they solved it 10 different ways.
That's interesting. I hear more and more data leaders talk about the role of creativity in data science and analytics. More and more.
Yeah, it used to be that, oh gosh, you had your sales data and you had your returns data and you had warranty data, and we had to put that together with a primary key and a certain set of foreign keys, and we fell through that data and we found out that, a certain set of people didn't like what we offered and we should have made it blue rather than red. And yeah, okay, anybody can do that kind of stuff, but let's try to figure out what are the orthogonal directions in data that can bring it in. We have so much data available to us, and I said we can create our own data. So let's use data to really drive competitive advantage. So that's where, as you said, you're seeing more and more creativity come in, and it's necessary because data and analytics is not just a linear thing anymore. We're looking to create competitive advantage. So the more ways we bring building blocks together and put them together in unique ways, top to bottom, side to side, the better off we are.
Thanks for sharing those tips. And one thing that many people speak about is a data-driven culture, and how to build it and what are the steps to take. The question I'm interested in is, what do you see as a good metric to see if people or organizations move ahead in building this data-driven culture?
Gilbert, that is the $1 million question, isn't it? It's people say they want a data-driven culture, and I understand it, and I love data, and I live in the data world, and I'm a data geek for sure. But it's hard to build a data-driven culture. You almost need to start with the top-level executives. They need to be data-driven. They're the ones that hold the investment, and they drive the culture, they drive the organization. So if your executives are not data-driven, then it's going to be very hard to be a data-driven company. The metrics I look for is when you talk about what's happening in the business, do you refer back to analytics? Do you reference, benchmarks and measurement? Do you say, hey, our customer adoption went up by 3%, and that 3% was driven by this customer segment in this region, in this area, which of course we increased our spending and advertising by this. If you're a data-driven company, your language is different. You refer to metrics, you refer to what drove those metrics, and you refer to what will come in the future from those metrics. You don't talk in generalities, you just don't talk in vague concepts. You refer to data, and you talk about why things changed, and you understand the programs that drove that change.
Right, I like that perspective. So it's about language, and when I think about language, I also think about communication. And what do you see as the role of communication, and also how other data leaders who are listening, who are managing one or multiple data teams, how can they foster communication skills of the people in their team?
It's a great question. I'm on the advisory boards of the University of Texas, Oakland University, Ferris State, a number of U.S. universities. And I work with them on their curriculums around advanced analytics and artificial intelligence at the undergraduate and the graduate level. And I'm sure they're tired of me. I almost sound like a broken record at times, that I'm always saying we need to spend more time teaching the students about communication. We need to teach them about written, verbal, and presentation skills, because we spend most of our time communicating. Well, at least we should spend most of our time communicating. So I talk to my team about, all those skills, written, verbal, presentation. In my previous job at CSL, and I will be doing it at EY, we brought in presentation coaches. We brought in visualization experts. We brought in writing coaches, and we put people through different seminars and different training classes that were not demanded by the organization. And what happened after I ran my teams through that is I got consistent feedback from other executives that man, I love to have your people show up in meetings. They are so organized, they communicate so well, they're very clear on what they're talking about, and they talk about things in our terms. So, we as analytics professionals have to be kind of chameleons. When we sit amongst ourselves, we can talk about data and models and all kinds of things that we're interested in. But I always tell all my teams, if you're going to a finance meeting, you're going to talk in the terms of finance. If you're going to a marketing meeting, you're going to talk in the terms of marketing. In a supply chain, the same thing. You're not going to talk about algorithmic approaches. You're not going to talk about data smoothing. You're not going to talk about data management technologies or approaches. You're going to talk about the terms and the metrics they're interested in. And at first, people push back. They're like, well, I don't know if I can do that. And I said, well, then you can't be part of this team, because it's not good enough to be a good modeler. It's not good enough to be a good data engineer. You have to be a good professional. You have to be a business person as well. And if you can do that, if you can, expand your world to include those lexicon of communication, then you're unstoppable.
Yes, I completely agree. Then you're unstoppable. And so you suggest to speak the language of the audience, right? Understand what language they speak and talk in their language. What do you suggest when you have a mixed audience of maybe marketing and finance, or even more difficult maybe, marketing and data people? How do you deal with such situations where you have a mixed audience you're talking to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've tried this all different ways, and I've made every mistake you could possibly make. So hopefully we can help our audience not make those same mistakes. It doesn't really work very well to try the abstraction approach, to move it up to a level where everybody can understand what you're talking about. Because if you do that, then nobody understands what you're talking about. So usually what I try to do is I try to do a presentation about the specific objective that we're working on. And I try, if anybody's been in a presentation or a meeting with me, I try to get the point done in maybe 7 to 10 minutes. In a 30-minute meeting, that gives you 23 to 20 minutes for open dialogue and Q&A. And that's where it really comes to a shared understanding of what you're talking about. I don't like it when someone presents for 29 minutes of a 30-minute meeting and they go, "Oh, are you okay?" It's like, no, I'm not okay. I'm not even sure what you said. So more talking, more communicating. And then, while I try to talk about, the objective we're working on, then if someone from the data group asks me a question, I talk to them about data type of concepts. And then I'll turn to the other people in the room and I said, does that response make sense to you? Generally, the answer is going to be no. Then I'll answer the question for them using their lens. So I go back and I usually answer questions 2 or 3 different times in a meeting. I was in a meeting once, probably 25 years ago, and it was a very, very important meeting with a thought leader and someone who had great weight in the industry. And I was talking to him for, it seemed like forever. I think it was maybe just under a half hour. And he said to me, he goes, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't get it." And my boss was there, and some of the board members were there, and I thought I was just going to melt. So I went back at it, and I answered his question again. And he said, "I still don't get it." And I went back at it. We did that 4 times. And I took different tacts, took a business approach, took an operations approach, took a industry analyst approach, and just kept answering it. And finally, he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, now I get it." He goes, "I got a little bit out of every time you answered it differently." And he goes, "Finally, all made sense to me." We walked out of there, and my boss, who was the CEO, looked at me and he goes, "That was truly impressive." He goes, "I thought you were going to be, just absolutely sunk after the first response." And I'm like, "Nope. I can always go back at it many different ways."
Yeah, I like that. Thanks for sharing that story. And it shows that we need to also be confident and willing to ask the question, right? Because it's much safer to just finish your presentation, talk about what you know, instead of asking a question, "Hey, are you still with me?" with the risk of people saying, "I haven't understood anything so far," and then trying to improvise and work your way. But actually, it's the best way, right? Because then you keep the connection, you keep the attention of the audience, and you make sure that they understand what you're saying. So what I understand from you is that throughout your presentation, you check if the audience is still engaged, still with you. And also at the end, I guess, I want to check with you. At the end, you also lay down some questions, or you open it for Q&A or for a conversation. That talking about that last part, how do you do that? How do you transfer from your conclusion, the last words you're saying in your presentation, to opening up the floor?
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually what I'll do is I'll say to people, look, I want this to be a dialogue rather than a diatribe. I would love you to ask questions all the way through the presentation. There's very few things that I haven't been involved in that would stump me. But if people don't do that, which is often the case, people just want you to do your presentation and then they'll open it up for Q&A, because that's the way most people do their presentations. So if I've gone through and I don't get a whole lot of questions and I've done my presentation, then as you can tell, Gilbert, I'm big on telling stories. So, I'll tell a story that's related to what we're talking about and just hang in there for a little while. And then someone will get brave and break the ice and ask a question. Or, sometimes I even do it where I say, you know what? These are the questions people ask me all the time. So I'll ask a question that I get quite frequently and I'll answer it. Then I'll ask myself another question and I'll answer it. And, I just go back and forth talking to myself for a while. And then someone will break the ice. And then after that, then it's just usually a flood. People are then, hey, what about this? And what about that? And I've got 2 follow-on questions. And how about this? And then it really opens up. So, asking yourself questions, because you and I talk to a lot of people. And, there's themes of questions. So that seems to work pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Great tips. You mentioned telling a story, right? That is related to the content, related to the presentation. Many people tell me I don't have any stories to tell. Can you share what is the process, so the detailed process of you doing a presentation and then thinking, hey, what should be an appropriate story to tell? Can you bring us in the mind of John Thompson, how that worked for you?
That's a frightening place to be, Gilbert. Well, as I said, I've mentioned a couple times now, I grew up in this small town and my father had an auto repair shop, and right next to it there was a gas station, and funny enough, behind his shop was another auto repair shop. And different people went to different places for different things. And often these guys, they're all old men, would be standing around telling stories. So when I was a kid, I sat around and listened to these fish stories, these embellishments. You knew they were just made up. They were for entertainment and everybody was laughing and enjoying themselves. That's where I learned how to tell stories. I'd just be sitting in the corner listening to some of these rather ribald stories at times that a 7-year-old should not be listening to, but it was fun. I really enjoyed it. But I really don't, this is truly a peek into my mind. I don't really plan too much stuff. When I do a presentation, I'm just listening to what people are saying and how they're reacting. Are they reticent? Are they coming forward? Are they engaged? Are they afraid to ask a question because they might look, they might think that they look stupid? So I'm gauging the audience that I'm in, the environment that I'm in. And I may tell a story that makes me look vulnerable, because I want to bring people forward. Or I may tell a story of how we worked on a really hard problem and solved it. I don't think about it beforehand. I never rehearse anything. So, usually if you're talking to me, you're getting right off the top of my head what I'm thinking about.
Right. And it sounds like it all starts with the human side, right? You're talking about vulnerability, about listening, and about seeing, hey, are people connected to what I'm saying? And and yeah, so that also connects to what you said before, what kind of traits you look for.
Mm-hmm.
In the last minutes, we have talked about different things, also about the book, Building Analytics Teams. I highly recommend it to everyone. But as I mentioned in the introduction, there's also a new book coming, a new book out, Data for All. So what would you like to share about that? How is this book different, and what would you like to talk about?
No, that's a great question, and thank you for teeing that up. You're so kind, Gilbert. Building Analytics Teams was for analytics teams. I affectionately refer to it as a nerd book because I think of myself as a nerd. So, it was all the people who do data and analytics, and that's a small population of the world, believe me. Data for All was written for everybody. And it really was a product of the 15 years of conversations at the dinner table with our 2 children and my wife. Because it became clear that most people don't understand what happens when you pick up your phone and you go online and you go to Facebook, you use apps. People don't understand what happens to the data. Most people don't. We generally do. But I take people through the world of data and what happens to your data. Where does it go? Who has it? Who stores it? Who owns it? Most people don't know that they own their own data. They think Facebook owns their data, or General Electric, or Procter and Gamble, or Emirates Airlines. They don't realize that they own their data. So what I do is through the book, I take them through the history of data, the last 100 years of data, why we think about data the way we do today. And then I talk about, I know that you're in Europe, I talk about all the EU laws that are coming onto the books, the AI Act, the Data Act. I go back to GDPR. And I talk about what's going to happen in the future, how you're going to be able to control your data. You're going to be able to obtain your data, download it, delete it, modify it, do all sorts of interesting things with it, and then ultimately monetize it. So it's a book for everybody. And I've talked to a lot of people and they're like, I'm going to buy that for my daughter or my son or my nephew or my cousin or my wife or my grandpa. It really lays out what happens when you go online with your data and what will happen in the coming years.
What do you think is the risk if people don't learn about these things?
We've already gone, down a certain path where people give up their data for free, and then they're the product. They're targeted by advertising. Unfortunate people do things with their data. There's phishing scams and and all sorts of fraud and things that go on, and that'll continue, and it'll probably even increase over time. So I just want everybody to make the best decisions they possibly can for themselves. I'm not saying don't use Facebook. I'm not saying don't use Grubhub or, any apps or anything like that. I love technology. I love data. You should use what works for you in your life, but you should be aware of what the consequences are and what the repercussions are and where your data is going. And if you're comfortable with that, then cool. That's all good. And I did a calculation that said that, just an average person, I actually used me as an example. I mean, just doing what I'm doing now, when we get to a point of monetizing data, my data dividend that I'll get paid should be about $2,000 a year. So why wouldn't I want $2,000? Some people say, oh, it's not worth it. It's not enough money. It's not. I said, well, I'm going to do these things anyway, and now I'm getting nothing. So I'd like to get $2,000. I mean, $2,000 is useful to me.
Right. Yeah, you're also giving something. So it's it's fair to get something from it.
Truly is. Truly is.
I would like to go to a few quicker questions, and then we move towards the end of the interview. So, first thing I would like to ask is, what is something you've learned in your career that you wish you would have known earlier?
It's all about people.
All about people. All right. Are you an early bird or night owl? I guess
Early
you
bird.
answered the one in the beginning.
Yeah, I'm always up early. Always up early.
What's your favorite book?
I'm reading a book right now called Practical Egyptian Magic, and I'm really enjoying that book. So that's the book I'm reading right now. My favorite book of all time was by Viktor Frankl. The title escapes me. I think it was
The Man's Search for Meaning?
Man's Search for Meaning, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That I've read that book multiple times. I love it.
Yeah, wonderful book. Really, on so many levels. Fantastic book. What is your favorite analytics tool?
That's a really great question. I'd have to say Python.
All right. And what is one thing that many people don't know about you?
Wow, I talk all the time. It feels like people know so much about me. I stop to help anybody I can.
Sorry again?
I stop to help anybody I can. I help people get across the street, elderly people. I return carts in the shopping mall parking lot. If I see something I can do to help, I do.
Fantastic. It fits nicely in with the traits you're looking for in a successful data analyst or scientist as well.
True.
Kindness and empathy. Last question on the list. What job would you be terrible at?
I already know that. I retail, anything in retail. I worked in a retail job in high school and I got fired from it, so I'm not good at that.
All right, so we're nearing the end of the interview. We discussed many things. We talked about the traits of data professionals, not only the technical side, how managers can foster a data-driven culture, how they can teach their people skills that you talked about, and many other things. But what is one big takeaway you would like listeners to take away from this episode?
Data and analytics has been a field, and it continues to be a field, and it will grow dramatically. But I think we all need to be data and analytics literate. I spend a fair amount of time working with universities in the United States, and I'm looking to work with universities around the world. And I've spent the last 12 years working with our local high school, so we can start to teach students when they're teenagers about the value of data and analytics. So I think we as a profession should work really hard to help everybody be analytically literate.
Great. Thank you. And where can people follow you, connect with you, and find your books?
LinkedIn is generally the best place. And if you're an data and analytics professional, happy to connect with you. If you're trying to sell me a franchise scheme, I'm probably not going to connect with you. So LinkedIn is the best place, and Amazon is the best place to find my books.
Great. So for everyone, the new book is not available yet. When this is out, it will be, but Building Analytics Teams, definitely recommend it, and the other books as well. So what I would like to do is thank you for the conversation. It was really pleasant. I learned a lot as well. It opened my mind. So I hope it also opens minds of other people who are listening, who are working in analytics or even outside, to think more about the human side, to think about, hey, maybe the technical skills are important, but there are other traits that are equally important, at least equally important, like kindness, like listening, like communication. And yeah, in that sense, maybe paradoxically, we need to learn more about the human side to spread more data literacy in the world. So thank you very much for all your contributions, your books, and what you do for the community. So thanks again for today, John.
Thank you, Gilbert. Really appreciated the invitation. I was anticipating this conversation over the last couple of weeks and really looking forward to it. So thank you for inviting me. I really I appreciated it, and hopefully we can do it again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, John. For everyone listening, thank you for listening, and until next time. Do you want people to listen to your data and increase your business impact? Then take my free email course or do the quick self-test of your data communication skills. Go to mindspeaking.com and start learning today.